Hi, everyone, and welcome to my TED Talk for our Leadership in Sport class on transformational leadership. My name is Julia Wallace, and I believe that if the Washington Commanders could do it, so can you. So, to start with the NFLPA team scorecard, and though I know that you guys hopefully at this point all know what the NFLPA is, just to go over it again, it's the NFL's Player Association, which is a union for the NFL players that has the goal of directly improving the overall working conditions and daily experiences their players or workers have every day. And they do something really cool because every single year they release a scorecard where they survey all the players in the NFL, which was 1695 last year, and they have them rank things in various categories for their own team, whether that be the treatment of their families, their locker room, the head coach, or their ownership. What's awesome is that it's scored by the players themselves, and it helps them and the other players in the league make important career decisions about whether they should stay with their team or transfer to one that they see has values that they share as well. And overall, because this is so public and a lot of people take pride in it, it raises the standards across the league for all the teams because when one thing is released, that's really embarrassing that we scored an F in this and other teams are scoring an A. We don't want to lose our players. So they work to improve those things, hopefully, if they have a good leader. Each category is weighted differently. It creates an overall score, and then the teams are ranked, and nobody wants to be at the bottom. Speaking of the bottom, this is the scorecard from the previous year, and we can see that the Washington Commanders occupy this awesome spot with an F minus, which is not awesome, and last in the NFL. So at this point, enter Dan Snyder. Dan Snyder is very well known among the sports community as the now former owner of the Washington Commanders, who, and I quote from an article from the USA Today, is a leader that did wrong at every turn. So, again from USA Today, they said Josh Harris, when he was able to take over, has already won in DC, even without a single game being played because of who he's not. He can take a bow just because he's not Dan Snyder. So, Dan Snyder, in 2.5 years, 2.5 decades, sorry, was able to transform the team from, even though I wasn't alive at the time, apparently the jewel of the NFL to a laughingstock. Fan attendance was first in the league and it dropped all the way to last. He went through 27 different quarterbacks, 10 head coaches, and a 4.24 winning percentage over his tenure. The team had won 3 Super Bowls in the decade preceding his ownership, and in the entire time that he was the owner, only appeared in the playoffs 6 times. So, while an organization's worth isn't entirely found in its record, I believe it's a pretty good indicator of the culture, and in this case, the steady decline of that over his tenure. In addition to his on-field struggles, his tenure was filled with a series of scandals that ranged from suing fans who asked to be released from their season ticket holder agreements because they couldn't keep up with the payments, to creating a toxic workplace environment with allegations of sexual harassment, workplace discrimination, pretty much anything horrible that you can think of. Things actually got so bad that the actual government had to get involved, with the House Oversight and Reform Committee committing its own separate investigation that came to the conclusion that the NFL and Commanders both covered up decades of sexual misconduct within the organization. So, following his long time coming, firing, or being forced to sell the team against his wishes, the Commanders actually were able to reach their first NFC championship since January 1992. In the NFLPA scorecard, they had received dead last for 2 years in a row, and the scorecard only existed for 3 years. They were able to jump from last this year to 11th overall. And I think that that is a pretty good example of some clear transformational leadership taking place. And while we can argue the merits of all of the individual leadership styles, and as we know from this class, all of them have their benefits, transformational leadership has a pretty key purpose: to transform. And what else could we ask for when asking to turn the worst organization as a new leader coming in a objective variety of categories, especially ownership, into one of the best in the shortest amount of time? So, transformational leadership refers to the leader guiding and motivating the followers beyond their immediate self-interest, which is something that the new owner, Josh Harris, vowed to do when he stepped in and improved the players' lives when he bought the team less than 2 years ago, saying that I am not an F minus guy. He didn't even know you could get an F minus, and obviously they've jumped all over that. So, transformational leadership, like I said, seeks to create the greatest amount of impact. And though they set challenging expectations for their followers, like jumping from last in the NFL to the top, they genuinely believe they can be achieved. And I believe that we've seen that watching the team go from missing the playoffs all the way up to the NFC Championship. They try to motivate their followers to transform themselves, and alongside this, they hope to transform the organizational culture by aligning the goals of the organization, the leader, and the group, and the individuals through key techniques like individual consideration, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, fostering acceptance of group goals, high performance expectations, which we definitely saw, and appropriate role modeling. So, transformational leadership strategies, there's a lot of research done in this category, and they've identified a lot of strategies that you can use to do so in your own leadership roles. The key one being that you should look for everywhere, according to Jennifer McGarry, where you can disrupt the structures that work to maintain the status quo in terms of impact, whether that be the in-groups and the out-groups, the metrics you're using, and continuous evaluations. It's important that we remain explicit about who we are, what our goals are, and how that impacts our experiences and how that makes us feel. And transformational leadership, though the commanders did a really good job of doing so in their new roles, clearly does not happen overnight, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of thought working with the individual team members to create strategies that work best for you, and connecting people to each other, and expanding your in-group and your out-group, which is exactly what Harris has done. He says his responsibility as a public figure in sports is to be present and enact positive change within his communities. Transforming the community is definitely an example of a transformational leader. He's quoted saying that establishing competitive edge requires tone setters and establishing a new kind of organizational culture. And by doing so, he's actively seeking player feedback to implement changes that enhance their environment and create one that they thrive in. One big thing that he's done is added a childcare space near the locker room, and we've been able to see the commander's score and treatment of team families has rapidly gone up over 1 year, where here they are sitting at the bottom 2 years in a row, all the way up to 11th. He has a high emphasis on creating a culture of respect and professionalism, and he says that he wants to change the ethical culture, and he has a zero tolerance policy for ethically challenged behavior, which is something that we can definitely all agree plagued Dan Snyder's previous term. And in terms of goal setting, he has a very strong focus on winning and attracting talent. Um, that being said, it's worked. They've jumped from last for 2 consecutive years to 11th, which is the third largest jump for any team across the league. And that being said, although it's only existed for 3 years, this is still something to be incredibly proud of, as we can assume, based on Dan Snyder's notoriety, that they probably would have been towards the bottom, including their lack of success for many years prior. They scored A's in a lot of different categories, including ownership and their head coach, and stuff like team travel and strength coaches. And their coach, Dan Quinn, their new head coach, actually even led the team to their first NFC championship game since '92, while receiving the highest player score of all coaches. That being said, are they number one now? No, they're 11th. But like we mentioned, transformational change definitely doesn't happen overnight. And this improvement obviously still represents a culture shift led by the Harris ownership group. Though there's still work to be done, like recognizing practices that still need to be improved that might reflect sociocultural embedded beliefs that we think treat everyone the same, treat everyone differently. But I think that this still goes to show that even the objectively worst cultures, which is objective, speaking in reference to the NFL scorecard, still aren't too dire to be changed, especially when the right leadership strategies are put into place. We're able to see the transformation from Dan Snyder, whose leadership was transactional and very fear-based, both amongst his players, coaching staff, and sport managers themselves who worked in departments like marketing, sales, anything over. It created silence, it created burnout, and a lot of negative things that players and people have come out and said over time. They were able to shift that into something transformational. And obviously, though that takes time, I think that the progress that they've made is clearly remarkable, reaching the NFC Championship game, something the Jaguars have still have to improve. And people are noticing when leadership changes, and they're able to attract new talent and change the culture overall. So, like I said, here's my references, but even if you think you can't, if the Washington Commanders can do it, you probably can too. And this is applicable to pretty much every kind of organization, whether that be marketing, whether that be ticket sales. If the Washington Commanders can do it, so can you.